So um, right now in a remote village in India, there's this rugged battery-powered metal kiosk,
Mm-hmm.
and it's using artificial intelligence to diagnose a patient's heart condition.
Right.
But at this exact same moment, if you look at a high-end clinic in California, medical providers are using digital billing networks to, quietly siphon millions of dollars from the U.S. government.
Yeah. It's a stark contrast.
It really is.
Yeah.
And then somewhere in a hospital ward in North India, a lethal strain of bacteria has literally just managed to permanently hard-code a resistance to our strongest drugs directly into its core DNA.
I mean, when you lay it out like that, it sounds like three entirely separate worlds.
Right.
But when you actually start pulling the threads on the sources we have today, you realize you're looking at the exact same fabric. It's
Yeah.
this singular, deeply fragile global ecosystem.
Exactly. And welcome to the deep dive. For everyone listening, we've got a really fascinating stack of sources to unpack with you today.
We really do.
Yeah, you sent us this incredible mix. We've got a clinical audit from a hospital in Nepal, a policy review of India's pandemic response, the engineering specs for that rural health kiosk.
Which are wild, by the way.
Oh, totally. Plus, a legal briefing on U.S. government fraud and this really terrifying microbiological study on a superbug.
Yeah, that last one is sobering.
Definitely. So our mission today, for you listening, is to weave all of this together. We're going to look at how health systems physically break under pressure,
Right.
how technology tries to patch those cracks,
Yeah.
how bad actors exploit those exact same cracks for profit, and, the ultimate biological price we pay when the whole system just fails.
I think what really stands out to me across all these documents is the tension.
What do you mean?
Well, you have this incredible, desperate human innovation fighting against just blatant exploitation.
Yeah.
And hovering over all of it is this microscopic world that is, constantly adapting to our mistakes.
It's like we're fighting a war on multiple fronts.
Right?
So let's start by looking at a system pushed past its absolute breaking point.
Okay.
We're going back to the COVID-19 pandemic in South Asia.
Right.
The policy review of India's response details a reality that I think most of us can barely comprehend. I mean, long before the virus even existed, this system was just running on fumes.
It really was.
The per capita health spend was just $73.
Yeah, and to put that $73 into perspective for you, the global average is about $1,110.
Oh.
So you're entering a once-in-a-century crisis with just a massive structural deficit from day one.
And we see exactly how that deficit physically manifests in the sources.
Mm.
Like in rural Uttar Pradesh, there were only 2.5 hospital beds for every 10,000 people.
Which is just, there's no buffer there.
None at all. And then the lockdowns hit, and 30% of the pharmaceutical factories were shut down.
Right, the supply chains just completely snapped.
Yeah, they couldn't get the active pharmaceutical ingredients needed to make basic, everyday medicines. The physical infrastructure just simply wasn't there.
And when that happens, it forces the system to rely entirely on human capital.
Right.
When the concrete and the supply chains fail, human beings basically have to absorb the shock.
Which brings us to the ASHA workers, the accredited social health activists.
Yes.
The sources point out that 1.3 million of these grassroots workers became the absolute backbone of the entire response.
We really did.
We're talking about women working 8 to 14-hour days in intense heat.
Yeah.
In rural Odisha alone, they conducted 8.3 million home visits.
It's staggering.
It is. They were doing symptom surveys, checking oxygen levels, delivering basic medications on foot.
I like to think of them as surge protectors in an electrical grid.
Oh, that's a good way to look at it.
Yeah, because if a massive spike in voltage hits the main circuitry, the whole system just catches fire and collapses. So these workers were out in the community identifying the symptoms early, managing the mild cases, and acting as that buffer.
So they took the hit.
Exactly. By preventing thousands of people from simultaneously crashing and needing those non-existent ICU beds, they absorbed the spike.
And the data proves it actually worked. The review notes that in the areas where they were most active, there was a 22% reduction in mortality.
Which is incredible.
It is. But as incredible as that human effort is, a surge detector eventually burns out, right?
Oh.
You can't just will a diagnostic test into existence through sheer effort.
Precisely. And I think that brings us to the clinical reality inside the hospitals that were receiving the patients who slipped past that buffer.
Right, which is perfectly captured in the clinical audit you shared. from the Sukraj Tropical and Infectious Disease Hospitals in Nepal.
Yeah, this is from 2021.
They analyzed 620 COVID patients. And credit where it's due, the audit shows that 97% of admissions followed the national guidelines.
Yeah, administrative discipline held up. Maintaining that level of protocol during a surge is no small feat.
No.
But guidelines on paper don't actually treat patients.
Right. And that's where the audit gets really alarming. There were these massive systemic gaps in actual care. Critical predictive tests were frequently just not done at all. The D-dimer test was missing in about 20% of severe cases.
Yeah.
And the CRP test was missing in about 32% of cases.
For someone listening who, doesn't spend their days reading medical charts, what are those tests actually telling a doctor?
Well, they're crucial navigational tools. COVID-19 isn't just a respiratory virus.
Right.
It causes severe vascular issues, including microclots in the blood. So the D-dimer test measures a protein fragment that your body makes when a blood clot dissolves.
Okay, so it shows if clotting is happening.
Exactly.
Okay.
High levels tell the doctor, hey, this patient is clotting internally. We need blood thinners right now.
Got it. And what about the CRP test? CRP stands for C-reactive protein. It basically measures systemic inflammation. It tells the doctor if the patient's immune system is just going into overdrive like a cytokine storm.
So without these tests, the doctors are essentially flying blind.
Completely blind.
They don't know who is about to throw a blood clot or whose immune system is attacking their own organs.
Right.
And to make it worse, the audit showed that remdesivir, a key antiviral medication, was only given to 22% of eligible patients.
Yeah, simply because the hospital supply chain had dried up.
Which I guess sets the stage for the most troubling statistic in that entire audit.
The antibiotic.
Yes, 70% of these patients were given antibiotics.
Yeah.
Now, I read that and immediately hit the brakes. COVID-19 is a viral infection. Antibiotics do absolutely nothing against a virus.
Nothing at all.
And according to the audit, only about 35% of these patients were even tested for bacterial cultures. And of those, only a quarter actually came back positive. So I find myself wondering, is this just a massive failure of medical protocol?
Right.
Like, are these doctors just being negligent by handing out antibiotics like candy?
Yeah.
To me, it feels like building a bridge for bicycles and suddenly forcing it to carry a fleet of freight trains. Everything just buckles.
I get why you'd see it that way. It looks totally negligent on a spreadsheet.
Yeah.
But if you put yourself in the shoes of a doctor on that ward, it is textbook battlefield triage.
How so?
Well, you have a patient whose lungs are failing. You don't have the CRP tests to gauge inflammation.
Right.
You don't have the antivirals to fight the virus itself.
Okay.
But you know that viral infections often severely weaken the immune system, leaving the door wide open for a secondary bacterial pneumonia to swoop in and kill the patient.
Oh, wow. So they're prescribing out of sheer desperation.
Exactly. You can't test for the bacterial infection, so you use the only tool you have left.
Antibiotics.
Yeah. Antibiotics are the ultimate blunt instrument. You throw them at the patient, hoping to preemptively kill any bacteria that might be taking advantage of the COVID infection.
Just trying to keep them alive today.
Right. It's a desperate attempt to save a life today. But, as we're going to see a bit later, relying on that blunt instrument sets off a biological chain reaction that is incredibly dangerous.
Okay, so if human surge protectors burn out and physical hospitals are crippled by supply chain failures, how do you even fix it?
Well, that's the big question.
Because you can't just build 1,000 new hospitals and train 10,000 new doctors in the middle of a crisis.
No, you can't. So you digitize.
Right.
You look for ways to scale healthcare access without having to scale physical bricks and mortar.
And that leads us to the digital infrastructure push we see in the sources from India. The scale is just staggering.
It really is.
They used a digital platform called CoWIN to facilitate 1.6 billion vaccine doses.
Yeah.
And incredibly, 73% of those sessions happened in rural areas.
Which is a massive logistical achievement.
Definitely. And then they launched the Ayushman Bharat digital mission, which generated 73 crore, that's 730 million unique health IDs.
And creating a health ID isn't just about giving someone a number. It's really about interoperability.
What do you mean by that?
Historically, a rural patient's medical history was written in a paper ledger at a local clinic.
Right, in a filing cabinet somewhere.
Exactly. So if they traveled to a city hospital, their medical history didn't travel with them.
Ah, I see.
A unified digital ID means a specialist hundreds of miles away can instantly access that patient's blood type, their allergies, their previous treatments.
It attempts to create a national digital nervous system.
Exactly.
But a digital nervous system still needs a way to physically interact with a patient's body.
Right.
And that's where the hardware innovation comes in. The sources mention these iLab diagnostic vans operating in Mizoram and Assam.
Yeah, those are really cool.
They actually managed to cut testing turnaround times from 72 hours down to just 6 hours.
Which saves lives.
Absolutely. But the piece of tech that really grabbed my attention was the Clinics on Cloud Health Kiosk.
Oh, yeah. It's a fascinating attempt to decentralize diagnostics.
I looked at the specs for this thing, and it basically feels like a healthcare ATM.
That's a great way to describe it.
Right. The idea is you can drop this rugged, metal-bodied kiosk in a village miles away from a paved road. It has an internal battery that can run completely off the grid for 3 to 4 days. And in less than 15 minutes, it can measure over 60 health parameters. We're talking ECGs, lipid profiles, infectious disease markers.
Which, by the way, requires incredibly sophisticated point-of-care dry chemistry.
Really?
Oh, yeah, and advanced sensor arrays to pull off outside of a traditional sterile laboratory.
That's wild. And then the kiosk uses AI to instantly process all those parameters, generate a comprehensive health report, and send it directly via WhatsApp or email, which then instantly connects the patient to a telemedicine consultation.
It's an engineering marvel designed specifically for extreme low-resource environments.
It is.
Yeah.
But looking at the broader context of the sources, I have to say I'm deeply skeptical.
Okay, why is that?
Well, the India Policy Review we discussed earlier explicitly noted that 40% of rural teleconsultations are abandoned.
Right.
Why? Poor internet connectivity, so I
Yeah.
have to ask. Is a highly advanced kiosk actually solving the root problem?
That's the million-dollar question.
Like, what good is a 4-day offline battery if the AI needs a 4G connection to send the WhatsApp report to the doctor? Are we just slapping a shiny high-tech Band-Aid over a gaping infrastructure wound?
That is the critical flaw in tech solutionism. You're spot on. Technology is only as effective as the surrounding ecosystem.
Right.
If the kiosk sensors detect a severe cardiac arrhythmia, but the consultation drops because the local cell tower is overwhelmed, the diagnosis is essentially useless. Furthermore, if a telemedicine doctor successfully connects and prescribes a medication, but there's no physical supply chain to deliver that drug to the village, the loop is broken.
Yeah.
The kiosk is a bridge that gets you halfway across the river. It's a necessary step, but entirely insufficient on its own.
So we have South Asia dealing with a lethal scarcity of resources and attempting to bridge the gap with AI and digital IDs.
Right.
Now, let's flip the lens entirely. What happens when a government system isn't starved of cash, but flooded with it?
You create an entirely different kind of vulnerability. You create an irresistible target for fraudsters.
Welcome to the United States.
Yeah.
Our source here is the 2022 Mid-Year False Claims Act, update from the law firm Gibson Dunn. Just in the first 6 months of 2022, the Department of Justice brought in $500 million in False Claims Act resolutions.
And for context for the listener, the False Claims Act, or FCA, is the U.S. government's primary civil weapon against fraud. It's historically used to police massive programs like Medicare and Medicaid.
And when the pandemic hit and the government injected trillions of dollars into the economy, opportunists just had a field day.
They really did.
We're looking at cases where a Virginia company simply fabricated documents to fraudulently obtain Paycheck Protection Program loans.
Unbelievable.
We see a medical provider network caught billing the government for completely unnecessary telehealth visits.
Yeah.
And then there was a California health system that paid a $3 million settlement because they were submitting claims to Medicare for highly complex genetic testing that the patients absolutely did not need.
I imagine you immediately thought of the clinical audit from Nepal.
I couldn't stop thinking about it. It's this incredibly dark, enraging irony.
Yeah.
On one side of the globe, doctors are watching COVID patients suffocate because they literally cannot source a $5 D-dimer test.
Right.
Meanwhile, in California, clinics are aggressively ordering wildly expensive, completely useless genetic tests for healthy people, solely to drain money from a government program.
It perfectly illustrates the polarities of this global ecosystem. Systemic failure in Nepal looks like death by scarcity.
Yeah.
Systemic failure in the U.S. looks like theft by abundance.
Wow. That's incredibly well put. And The nature of that theft is evolving fast. The DOJ update details a new priority called the Cyber Fraud Initiative.
Right.
They went after a medical provider in Florida and fined them $930,000. But they weren't fined for faking a surgery or billing for a phantom patient.
Mm.
They were fined for failing to adequately secure their patients' electronic medical records from hackers.
Because in a digitized healthcare system, data is as valuable as the treatments themselves.
Exactly. Now, to catch all this fraud, the U.S. government relies heavily on a provision in the False Claims Act known as CRE-TAM. This allows private citizens whistleblowers to sue the fraudsters on behalf of the government. And if they win, the whistleblower gets a massive cut of the settlement.
Yeah, it's a huge incentive.
The source cites a pharmaceutical kickback case where 2 whistleblowers walked away with nearly $30 million.
A life-changing amount of money.
To say the least. And states are getting even more aggressive. Colorado just passed their own False Claims Act, which mandates double damages even if the defendant cooperates, as long as the case is under seal.
Wow.
Yeah. The Supreme Court is even stepping in with the Polanski case to determine how much power the DOJ has to dismiss these whistleblower lawsuits if the government doesn't want to pursue them.
Right.
But I look at that $30 million payout, and I have to wonder, doesn't this create a mercenary justice system? Are we basically just paying bounty hunters to police our hospitals?
We are absolutely paying bounty hunters because the economics of compliance demand it.
What do you mean?
The U.S. government is tacitly acknowledging a hard truth. It does not have the manpower to audit a multi-trillion-dollar, highly decentralized healthcare system.
Right, that's too big.
Exactly. There simply aren't enough federal agents to check every billing code. By offering massive financial incentives to private citizens, you turn every nurse, every billing clerk, and every IT administrator into a potential government watchdog.
Oh, I see.
The mercenary aspect is precisely what makes the threat of exposure omnipresent.
So it's basically the only burglar alarm loud enough to actually work.
Exactly. But the most vital insight here connects directly back to those health kiosks and digital IDs in India.
How so?
The DOJ's cyber fraud initiative is a warning shot. As we push 730 million health IDs into the cloud, as we rely on algorithms to beam diagnostics over WhatsApp, the line between medical fraud and data security vanishes.
Right.
An unsecured server is no longer just an IT problem, it's a critical healthcare failure being prosecuted with the exact same ferocity as medical malpractice.
Okay, so we've seen the physical desperation in Nepal, the digital solutions in India, and the sheer greed in the U.S.
Yeah.
Now, we arrive at the final source, and I'll be honest, this microbiological study is the part of the deep dive that kept me awake.
I don't blame you.
This is where the bill for all our systemic failures comes due.
The study from the Sanjay Gandhi Postgraduate Institute of Medical Sciences, it is a sobering read.
Seriously, they examined 200 clinical isolates of a bacteria called Klebsiella pneumonia.
Right.
Out of those 200, they found 21 that were highly resistant to a drug called colistin.
And for anyone unfamiliar with pharmacology, colistin is a very old, highly toxic antibiotic.
Toxic how?
Well, it can cause severe damage to a patient's kidneys. Doctors absolutely despise prescribing it. It is kept locked away as the absolute drug of last resort.
Okay.
When a doctor reaches for colistin, it means every other modern antibiotic has already failed.
And 21 of these bacteria strains just laughed it off.
Yeah.
But it actually gets worse. Within those resistant samples, researchers found 4 isolates carrying something called the MERD1 gene.
Right.
Now, science has known about the MERD1 gene for a while. It's basically the code that gives bacteria the ability to defeat colistin. Usually this gene floats around inside the bacteria on a loose piece of genetic material called a plasmid.
Which is concerning, sure, but the mechanism is somewhat manageable.
Right. But the researchers made a terrifying discovery. In these 4 clinical isolates, the MERD1 gene wasn't floating around on a plasmid, it was chromosomal.
Yeah.
It had physically integrated into the bacteria's core DNA. Let me try to put this into an analogy.
Let's hear it.
If a bacterium is a computer, a plasmid is like a USB thumb drive.
Okay.
The bacteria can plug the drive in, use the resistance code to survive an antibiotic attack, and even pass that thumb drive to another bacteria nearby.
Yeah.
It's dangerous, but it's external.
And carrying that USB drive takes energy. There's a metabolic cost to the bacteria.
Oh,
If the antibiotics go away, the bacteria will often just eject the plasmid to save energy and it loses the resistance.
Exactly. But chromosomal integration. That means the resistance code has been downloaded off the thumb drive, and written directly into the computer's hard drive.
Yeah.
It is now hard-coded into the master operating system.
The analogy holds perfectly. It is a permanent genetic upgrade.
Wow.
It will be inherited by every generation of that bacteria moving forward. It's no longer a temporary defense mechanism. It is the new biological baseline.
That is terrifying. But the study did note one small sliver of hope.
Right.
While this chromosomal strain is highly resistant to major drug classes like carbapenems and cephalosporins, it thankfully remains susceptible to one specific antibiotic, cyclin.
Yes.
So I look at that and wonder, are we really facing a biological doomsday? Or is modern medicine just playing a very expensive, high-stakes game of pharmacological whack-a-mole? Like if one drug fails, we just hit it with the next one.
Okay. It is absolutely systemic whack-a-mole. But here is the mechanism you have to understand. We are entirely out of mallets.
Wait, really?
Yeah. Developing a genuinely novel class of antibiotics takes decades of research and billions of dollars in funding.
Okay.
And because antibiotics are meant to be taken for a few days rather than for the rest of a patient's life, like, say, a cholesterol drug, the pharmaceutical industry sees very little return on investment.
So they just don't bother.
We haven't discovered a truly new class of antibiotics in decades.
So we're basically fighting a 21st century chromosomal mutation with mid-20th century weapons.
Exactly. And this brings us full circle directly back to the clinical audit in Nepal.
Oh, right.
Remember the 70% of COVID patients receiving antibiotics without confirmed bacterial infection?
The battlefield triage.
Yes. When a global health system is starved of resources, when doctors lack the diagnostic tools that those rural kiosks are trying to provide, they are forced to guess.
Right.
They overprescribe broad-spectrum antibiotics out of pure desperation. But when you flood a population with antibiotics, you create a massive evolutionary pressure cooker for the bacteria.
You force them to adapt rapidly.
You force them to take temporary defenses like the Malara-1 plasmid and hard-code them into their chromosomes just to survive.
It's a closed loop of systemic failure.
Precisely.
Okay.
A lack of infrastructure leads to blind prescribing. Blind prescribing creates chromosomal superbugs.
Yeah.
And treating those superbugs requires an incredibly expensive, highly advanced medical infrastructure that the system didn't have in the first place.
Wow. So what does this all mean for you navigating this world today? Why should you care about a battery-powered kiosk in rural India, or a billing fraud settlement in California, or an audit from Nepal?
That's a fair question.
We've journeyed through the hidden plumbing of global healthcare today. We've seen how physical infrastructure collapses under the weight of a crisis, demanding impossible sacrifices from frontline workers.
Right.
We've explored the attempt to build digital bridges with AI diagnostics and massive health databases, while acknowledging they are, useless without physical supply chains.
Yeah.
We've watched opportunistic clinics use the chaos to steal millions, forcing a government to rely on highly paid whistleblowers to police the system. And finally, we've seen how our collective failures are literally being recorded into the DNA of the bacteria around us.
It's all connected.
You need to care, because this ecosystem is entirely interconnected. A chromosomal mutation forged in a hospital in North India, fueled by a broken supply chain and desperate prescribing, is just one commercial flight away from a cutting-edge hospital in California.
Absolutely.
A hospital whose servers might currently be compromised by a cyber fraudster. Disease, digital data, and fraud just do not care about international borders.
And if we synthesize all of these sources looking toward the horizon, we're left with a very profound provocation. Well, as our global health infrastructure digitizes entirely, as we become wholly dependent on AI kiosks, unified health IDs, and automated diagnostic algorithms, will the next global pandemic even be fought by human doctors?
Oh, wow.
Or will it be managed entirely by algorithms dictating care? And perhaps a more chilling thought.
Well,
Will the next massive multi-billion-dollar healthcare fraud be perpetrated by a human or by an AI that has learned to quietly manipulate those very same diagnostic algorithms without a human auditor ever noticing?
now that is a thought that will stick with you long after you take your headphones off. The line between treating a patient and exploiting a system is getting thinner, and increasingly, it is written in code. Thank you for joining us as we unpack this incredible stack of sources. Stay curious, stay informed, and we'll catch you on the next Deep Dive.